All right, good afternoon. I know that you all have learned so much already about direct and cross-examination, and so we're going to just get right into the demonstration and talk on the other side of it about what we've seen. So we're going to call to the stand Debra Farrell. Ms. Farrell, will you raise your hand? You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth? Okay. Counsel? You may proceed.
My name is
Okay. Would you state your name, please?
My name is Debra Farrell.
And where did you go to college?
I went to Emory University.
What kind of degree did you get?
I received my business degree from Emory.
Directing your attention back to March of 2010, did you begin employment somewhere in Emory City?
I did. I began employment with Cato Investing.
What is Cato Investing?
It's an investment firm. We employ several stockbrokers and financial advisors.
Did you hold any license at the time you began working there?
I did. I had my Series 7 license, so I was authorized to sell securities.
And what was your position there?
I was an assistant to Frank Bocchio.
And what were your duties?
I had a variety of duties. I supported Frank in selling securities. As I mentioned, I was authorized to do that. I also supported his clients and managed his accounts when he was out of the office or unavailable.
Did Mr. Bacino have a lot of clients?
He did. He had several hundred clients.
Were you familiar with a pharmaceutical company named Kinlife?
I was familiar with Kinlife, yes.
How did it come about that you became knowledgeable about them?
We had one of our clients at Cato were the Kinloch family, several members of the Kinloch family, and William Kinloch was the CEO, president, and director of Kinlife Industries, excuse me.
Was William Kinloch a client of Mr. Bacino's?
Yes, he was.
Who is Alice Kinloch?
Alice Kinloch is his daughter.
Eliza, that was, excuse me. Was Mr. Bacino the financial advisor for other Kinloch family members?
Yes, he was. I believe he was also the financial advisor for one of Mr. Kinloch's, another one of his children as well as his uncle, I believe. There were several Kinlochs and family members that we represented.
Are you familiar with the term in the securities trade, piggybacking?
I am.
What does that mean?
Could you provide more detail, please?
Are there rules and regulations internally within the company, Cato, about a broker taking action based on events or things he learns from one client and taking action with respect to another client?
Yes, absolutely. We had several policies that would prohibit things such as insider trading, sharing confidential client information, or as you just mentioned, providing information to another client based on sales or securities transactions from a different client.
Now, the defendant in this case, Ms. Vansusdam, was she also a client of Mr. Bacino?
She was.
And did you have the opportunity to get a sense of how much contact there was between the defendant, Ms. Vansusdam, and your broker, Mr. Bacino?
Yes, they appeared to be very good friends. They were very close. Ms. Vansusdam brought in quite a bit of business, so it was not surprising to me that Frank would want to maintain a good relationship with her.
All right. Let's direct your attention to December 27, 2012. Do you recall being at work that day?
I do.
Specifically directing your attention to about 8:30 in the morning. Did you receive a telephone call from someone?
I did. I received a call from Elisa.
Kinloch, that was?
Correct, yes.
And what'd she say?
She wanted to place an order to sell all of her stock in Kinlife Industries.
Did she give you any instructions about the time frame that you wanted you to carry that direction out?
Yes, the request seemed urgent and it needed to be completed by close of business that day, the 27th.
Now, do you know an individual named James Gordon?
Yes, I am familiar with James Gordon.
Did you also that morning receive a call from him?
I did.
And what did he tell you?
James Gordon is William Kinloch's accountant, and he similarly asked that we sell all stock in Kinlife Industries on behalf of Mr. Kinloch and his family.
Did he also tell you when he wanted you to do that?
Yes, similar to Eliza, that needed to happen same day, the 27th.
Did he say anything to you about your telling or not telling anyone else about these actions being taken with respect to their shares?
Yes, Mr. Gordon made it very clear that this was very confidential, it would not be made public, and that needed to be kept secret.
Now, are you familiar, and were you familiar then, with something going on with the Kinlife Pharmaceutical Company?
Yes, I was aware of a new drug that they had applied for licensing through the FDA.
And was it known that the FDA was about to act on that licensing application?
It would not have been known on that day. It was not publicly known, no.
And on that same day, December 27, 2012, was Frank Bacchino in the office?
He was not.
Where was he?
He was on vacation in Florida.
Did you try and reach him?
I did.
Were you able to?
I was, yes.
Were you able to speak at length with him?
I did speak with him, yes.
What did you speak about?
Well, we discussed a number of things. I first had asked him, I wanted to confirm that we were able to, pursuant to our policies or within our policy, to sell the stock that the Kinloch family owned in Kinlife Industries. I also discussed that with some of our other Cato brokers. We also discussed Nancy Vansusdam and giving her a call.
And later that morning, did he call back and ask you to link him up with someone?
Yes, he did. He asked me to link him up with Nancy.
And did you try and do that?
I did. Unfortunately, we weren't able to reach her. We were, which typically happens, got in touch with her secretary, Miss Armstrong.
And what did Miss Armstrong tell you?
Miss Armstrong let us know that Nancy was traveling that day. At the time that we called, she was actually on a flight, so she was unavailable.
Were you able to overhear the conversation between Miss Armstrong and your broker, Mr. Bacchino?
I was on the call.
And what did Mr. Bacchino say to her?
Mr. Bacchino wanted to leave her a message, and that message was that Frank Bacchino believes that the Kinlife shares would be trading downwards.
And about 30 minutes after that conversation, did you receive another call from someone?
I did. I received a call from Nancy's assistant, Miss Armstrong again, linking me through to Nancy. Or excuse me, before that, I received another call from Frank.
Right. And what did Mr. Bacchino say in that call?
He wanted me to be sure to let Nancy know if she called back that the Kinlochs had sought to sell their shares in Kinlife Industry and that she may want to act on that information.
What was your reaction to Mr. Bacchino saying that to you?
I was surprised, and I followed up with him to confirm that that would be consistent with our policies. I asked if that was something that we could actually do.
And did Mr. Bacchino say something to you to let you know what you should or should not do?
He did. He told me it was not a matter of what we could or couldn't do, but that I was to do it.
Did you in fact do it?
I did.
Why?
Because it was at the instruction of my boss, and I was afraid that I would lose my job if I didn't follow his instructions.
That same day in the afternoon, did you have the occasion to speak to Miss Armstrong again?
I did.
What did she want?
Miss Armstrong was going to link me through to Nancy.
And did she want to try and get hold of Mr. Bacchino?
She did, yes.
What did you tell her?
Unfortunately, he was unavailable at the time, so I was not able to put them in touch.
At some point in the conversations you had with Miss Armstrong, did she put Miss Vansusdam on the line with you?
Yes, she did.
And what did you tell Miss Vansusdam?
Just as Frank had asked me to do, I let her know that the Kinloch family was seeking to sell all of their shares in Kinlife Industries and that she may want to act on that information.
Did Miss Vansusdam ask you anything concerning the current then stock price of Kinloch, what it was trading at?
Yes, she did. She asked me the stock price.
And do you recall what you told her?
I believe it was at $58 at the time.
And did she give you an authoritative instruction concerning what you should do with her shares of Kinlife?
She did. She instructed me to sell all, I believe it was around 3,985 shares.
At what price were you able to get for the 3,900 plus shares of stock that Ms. Vansusdam had in Kinlife?
At the time that we sold, the shares were at, I believe, about $58.34 per share, so somewhere around just over $40,000, I believe.
Did you take any notes of your conversation with Ms. Vansusdam that day?
I personally did not take any notes, but of course the transaction records would be in Cato Investing's files.
Now, Ms. Farrell, what is a blue sheet?
A blue sheet is a document that we complete to make a record of any transactions or sales of stock.
If you would direct your attention to the screen up there, which is Exhibit 11, Slide 177, do you recognize that?
I do.
What is it?
This is the blue sheet that I would have created relating to the Nancy's sale of stock on December 27th in the Kinlife systems.
And if you could just run down from the top to bottom, what sort of information is contained on that?
Sure. We always provide the client name, of course, their specific broker, the date of the transaction type, in this case it was a sale, the type of security, the issuer, the number of shares that were sold, the price that they were sold at. There's a check to confirm that this was authorized by the shareholder. There's also an option to check whether this was pursuant to a stop order.
And what is the indication there on that Exhibit 11?
That this transaction was not done pursuant to a stop order.
What is a stop order?
A stop order is when a shareholder authorizes us to make a sale when the stock reaches a certain value. It's automatic. It doesn't require further action on our end. It's already been authorized.
If one of Mr. Pacino's clients has a stop order on a particular stock, do you take any action with respect to that in the records of the company?
Absolutely. We need to, of course, track the price of the stock and at what value the stop order is issued. So, of course, that's something that we track internally. We have electronic records so that we're notified when the stop order would become active.
How busy or how active is Mr. Pacino as a broker?
He's pretty busy. As I mentioned, he has hundreds of clients, and those clients can have stock in any number of companies. So he has quite a few.
Would it be feasible or practical for him to act on his memory with regard to a particular stock reaching a certain point, at which point he should then take action to sell it?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Withdraw. Was there any such entry of a stop order on any of the Kinlife shares that Ms. Vansusdam had?
I am not aware of one, no.
Now, moving forward, when you were first interviewed by the Securities and Exchange Commission, did you tell them the whole truth?
I did not.
Why didn't you?
I withheld some information to protect my boss and primarily to protect my job. I was very concerned about losing my job, and I'd been asked by my boss, or rather been provided extra vacation days and given some other benefits such as airfare, which I interpreted to be in an effort to keep myself quiet on what I perceived to be an inappropriate action in this case.
Were you and Mr. Frank Pacino physically intimate?
We were.
When did that affair end?
In February.
Who ended it?
He did.
Directing your attention back to December 28, 2012, the day after the events you've described, was that the date that the general public received information concerning the disapproval of the Kinlife's cancer drug?
Yes, it was.
Do you recall what the price of Kinlife stock closed at the close of business on December 28, 2012?
I recall that it dropped, I believe, 16 to 18% and landed somewhere in the low 40s.
With those two figures, 58 and 40s, approximately how much money did Ms. Vansusdam avoid a loss of by the selling of her shares on December 27?
As I recall, it was somewhere in the $50,000 range.
Now, did the SEC take any action against you?
I was interviewed, and yes, I've been prohibited from working for trading organizations and brokers.
What are you doing with yourself now?
I am currently pursuing my MBA at Emory.
Your witness.
Thank you. Counsel?
Thank you.
I added one question. It was a bad one. That's the way we operate in the Southern District of Georgia. That was a good objection.
Good evening, Ms. Farrell. You've told two different stories about what happened on December 27th, right?
I have told two slightly different stories, yes.
Well, you say slightly different stories. One story is that your boss, Mr. Burkino, was involved in ordering you to give insider information to my client, right?
Yes.
That's one of your stories. The other story says that that never happened, right?
I did not disclose that when I first discussed this matter. That's correct.
And, well, when you tell two different stories that are in conflict with each other, do you realize one of those is a lie?
Yes, one of those was not entirely accurate.
And when you tell lies, do you do it because there's something that you're going to benefit from that lie?
In this case, I did not tell any lies that would have benefited me.
So sometimes when you lie, you do it because you're trying to benefit someone else.
That's possible.
Now, sometimes your lies do benefit you, though, right?
I would need an example. Could you give me
You
an
don't
example?
know if you've ever lied to benefit yourself?
It's possible.
Let's talk about what happened in this case. You're working for Cato. You were not my client's broker, right?
No, I was an assistant to your client's broker.
You were assistant to my client's broker. And as the assistant, you were aware of the policies that your company had regarding insider trading, correct?
That's correct, but also as the assistant, I acted pursuant to my boss's orders.
Show you Exhibit 6 that's been received by the court. You're familiar with this document, right?
I am.
This is a copy of some of the policies, investing policies for your company, right?
That's correct.
And one of the things that it talks about, it puts right at the very top, is their insider trading policy, right?
Yes.
And in summary, what the document says, insider trading, bad thing, right?
Yes, it is a bad thing.
Not what Cato does, right?
That's correct. It would be against our policies.
Because what might happen is the government might be involved in investigating insider trading, right?
That's true, yes.
And even though you're not a broker, you know that if the government investigates, there can be criminal prosecution, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And when we talk about criminal prosecution, it means the people involved in insider trading could go to prison.
Yes, they can.
And that includes you if you're assisting someone with insider trading, right?
It could, yes.
And so that would be something that you wouldn't want to do, right? You don't want to go to prison, do you?
No, I don't.
I'm trying to understand what you've explained to the jury in your direct. If I understand you correctly, you're willing to go to prison if someone tells you that you should break this policy.
Respectfully, I was following my boss's orders. I was 25 years old at the time, and although I'm now very experienced and familiar with the consequences of this, I did what I was told.
Well, you do know the difference between losing your job and going to prison.
I do understand that, yes.
And you made a choice, according to you, that I'd rather face going to prison than losing my job. That's what you want us to believe, right?
That was not my thought process at the time. I was, again, following orders from my boss.
Let's talk a little bit about what your thought process was at the time. You were contacted in February of 2000, 2013 about this, right?
Yes.
By the Security Exchange Commission investigators, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And you knew that they wanted to get to the bottom of what had happened with this Kinlock trade, right?
Yes,
And they believed that you had information about that, right?
that's correct.
And we had seen you had information because you were the person that authorized the trade, right?
Yes,
And
absolutely.
for the record, we're looking at Exhibit 11, right?
Yes.
And because you were involved in it, they sat down with you and they told you why they were investigating.
Yes.
They told you that they thought that there might have been insider trading that was involved between you, your boss, the Kinlocks, and my client, correct?
Yes, that's my understanding.
And you assured them at the time that that was not the case, right?
Yes.
You told them that my client didn't know anything about the Kinlocks selling their shares, right?
I don't know that I would have identified her as my client, but that, yes, I would have supported that.
I'm sorry, when I use the phrase my client, I'm talking about my client in this
yes,
case.
yes.
You told them that my client knew nothing about the Kinlocks selling that, right?
Yes.
And that was consistent with what your boss told the SEC, correct?
Correct.
And you didn't stay with that story, right?
No, I contacted the SEC again to provide my accurate information.
And what had happened between the time you first talked to the SEC and the time you contacted them a second time is you had a conversation with your boss, right?
I had several conversations with my boss.
Well, I imagine you did. The one I'm asking about is the one related to your relationship with him, correct?
We did have a conversation about our relationship, yes.
Because you were upset with him during February of 2013.
Yes, I was not happy with him.
Because according to you, this married man that you had been seeing had made promises to you, right?
That's right. He told me he was going to leave his wife.
And you thought that that was a great idea, right?
I did.
You thought that this married man should break up his marriage to be with you.
Yes, and apparently so did he for a while.
Right, and in order to help convince him that that was a good idea, you gave yourself to him emotionally, correct?
What do you mean by that?
Well, you let him know how you felt about him.
I did. I told him how I felt, yes.
And you, in order to convince him to leave his wife, you gave yourself to him physically.
That would be accurate.
And after all that you had given him, you expected some things in return, didn't you?
Of course I did, yes.
You thought that he would give up his life with his wife to be with you, right?
Yes, I did, and that's what he told me.
And when he didn't do those things, he didn't give up his wife, well, it wasn't until February of 2013 that he had a conversation with you about that, right?
That sounds right, yes.
And you know that the government knew about that conversation because they had wiretapped his phone calls, right?
They had, yes.
And so it was during that time that you had a conversation with Mr. Burkino where he explained to you that he wasn't leaving his wife, right?
Yes.
And you made it clear to him that he had made certain promises to you, right?
I did regarding leaving his wife, yes.
And that you had expected that to happen, right?
Yes.
And you were not pleased with him, were you?
I was very, very sad.
And one of the things that some people do when they're not pleased with someone that hurts them emotionally is they lash out. You're aware of that, right?
That some people do that?
Objection, relevancy.
Counsel?
Well, the issue in this case, Your Honor, is this witness's potential bias as to my client and my client's broker. I think it's relevant to go into that issue.
I'll allow it. Overruled.
I can imagine that there are some people that do.
And what some people do is they make up stories to get back at the person that they're upset with, right?
It's possible that some people do that.
And some people do that because they're looking for ways to let that person know how much they've personally been hurt, right?
I don't really know if that's why they why some people do that.
Okay. Well, you were personally hurt by Mr. Bacchino, right?
I was, yes.
And after you got personally hurt by Mr. Bacchino, you contacted the SEC, right?
I did contact the SEC, yes.
And after you were personally hurt by Mr. Bacchino, it was the first time you ever told them that Mr. Bacchino had given you some insider information to share with Ms. Vansusdam, right? That was the first time you told them that, right?
The first time I told them that, yes, was sometime, I believe, in February of 2013.
As a result of telling the SEC that you had told them 2 stories, they realized that you had lied in one of the stories, right?
That's correct.
And you know it's a crime, a federal crime, to lie to federal investigators, right?
I do, so it was really putting myself at risk to come forward with the truth.
And one of the things that happens when people lie to federal authorities, they can sit where my client's sitting and charged with a federal offense, right?
Yes, absolutely.
You didn't end up having to go to trial on perjury charges to the FCC, right?
I did not.
One of the things that they told you was that if you gave them information about Mr. Bacchino, giving information to my client, that they wouldn't prosecute you for ever lying to them, right?
I offered that information well before that offer was presented.
And as a result of you making that offer to them and they accepting, you're not sitting facing criminal charges like my client is, right?
I am not currently facing criminal charges, no.
Thank you. I've got no further questions.
All right, great. I think you just saw 2 wonderful examples. Let's give it up for Joe Newman and Judge Mike Washington. So, you know, we talked a lot this afternoon about directing the theory of your case and making sure that gets pushed through your direct and cross-examination. So I told both advocates I'd ask them, how did Debra Farrell and her direct examination fit into your overall theory of the case, Joe?
She was doing great until the cross.
I mean, what's your theory of the case? How did she fit into it?
There's not much of a case without her testimony.
Right, right.
And if she doesn't survive the cross, it might put a pretty good dent in it.
Okay. And Mike, what was your approach for your theory on your cross?
Mine was pretty clear that I didn't want to get into the facts of the case, really. I wanted to get into the type of person that she was, because if the jury believes that she's the type of person that would be upset enough to make up a story, then they're not going to believe her. Well, I don't need to get into the details. I realized, as I prepared for this, that I could try to get into the facts and the contrast her 2 stories and spend more time on that. I really didn't want to. I just wanted to get an impression, an emotional impression, and that's why I used some of the language I did to try to connect emotionally to the jury and through the witness. I wanted her to react emotionally to some things I said so the jury could see that and hopefully make some conclusions that I'm sure we want to trust her with our decision, because if they don't trust her, my case just got better.
Okay, great. So a couple of takeaways from the direct. I mean, you saw the organization that Joe put into it. You saw that the witness forgot some information, and it was okay for Joe at that point to really ask a very closed-ended question, and it was in an area that was really not in dispute, right? Piggybacking. He didn't ask her whether or not they engaged in piggybacking or not. He just asked whether or not she understood what piggybacking was, and I think that's the concept in and of itself was a fact that wasn't in dispute, and he helped the witness out to move the testimony along. He used head notes, right? Directing your attention directly to that 1227 area. That's what you want to do. You don't want to leave it free-flowing. You want to be able to be directive in the direct examination. And you saw that his direct called for a number of telephone conversations that this witness had with various people. On direct examination, when you're planning this out, you need to anticipate how that testimony gets into the record. So even though Judge Washington did not object, Maybe he thought about, I'm sure, the objection and what the response is going to be. You need to anticipate that. So when you're strategizing, you need to, get into 801, get into 803 and 804 and decide, is this even hearsay at all, right? And if it is hearsay, is there a hearsay response that you're going to have at the ready? Because as you saw, that was the critical part of that witness's testimony, and so you need to make sure it gets in with ease. Another part of the direct examination that you should take note of is how to deal with damaging testimony. And so you saw that Joe didn't avoid that. I mean, he got to the fact that there was the affair and the fact that she, didn't tell the truth. But what he did afterwards, of course, he didn't end there. I mean, he let her explain. He didn't end there. He said, all right, now back to the date at issue, right? So what did he do? He just minimized the value and the importance of that testimony, and he ended on such a strong point, which is what you want to do, especially when you have this witness and you know there's going to be a kind of a blistering cross-examination afterwards, end on a strong point. So the cross-examination, something that I'm sure you all took, notes on is the impeachment regarding her telling two different stories, right? Now, you probably heard this afternoon about don't ask the ultimate question, were you lying then or are you lying now? And actually, he didn't ask that. He just got her to commit or admit that you realize one is a lie, which is a different question from asking, is this one the truth or is this one a lie, right? I mean, a really great technique in terms of going right to the line, not asking the ultimate question. Using the witness's own words. So the witness used words like, that wasn't exactly my thought process then. And what was the next question? Well, let's talk about your thought process then. So you're going to have cross-examination questions or an outline that's prepared and how you want to get through the cross, but you have to be in the moment. You have to be reacting and reflective in the courtroom and making sure that you capture the witness's own words and use them to your advantage. The objection was definitely a fair one to the relevance. I mean, on cross-examination, Judge Washington asked a lot of questions about what other people would have done if they were trying to prevent, if they were hurt, basically how they would act. And again, if you feel like that's a topic that you want to explore with her, the objection was raised. He had a great response to the relevance. And so again, on your cross-examination, anticipate objections, and so he was able to go clearly to, hey, it goes to motive, it goes to bias, but you should have seen what he did at that point. He narrowed his questions afterwards, and so the impact, even though the objection was overruled, it forced him as the attorney to get into the fact of what she would do whether or not, when she's hurt as a person. Couple of other points just to think about in terms of your cross-examination. One fact per question, and so even though there were points at which Mike had to go back in and tie her down, he never asked more than one fact per question. In terms of your direct examination, remember to use some diagrams. I thought, again, or at least exhibits. Both of the attorneys used exhibits to help tell the story and to move the action along further. I'm going to let you go. We'll see you at the reception.
Good job, man.